Good evening, and thanks for joining us for Wednesdays with the Mayor. I'm Dennis Bragg. We're joined by Mayor Andrea Davis. We're here at the Missoula Public Library up on the 4th floor as our weekly visit to talk about city issues and different things. Andrea, good to see you.
Thank you, Dennis.
Glad to join us tonight.
Great
We're
to see you.
excited about this one. We had talked about this some time ago. Jenny Merriam, who does all of the organizing, she's technically our producer, I guess, for the show. And we talked about doing about the Bear Aware program because all of this is changing right now, the first implementation of the new regulations. And so we thought this would be a real good topic to sort of dive into tonight. And we have some great experts with us, two people that I tremendously respect. I've learned a lot about grizzly bears and black bears and all those kinds of critters. Chris Servine is with us. He, of course, was the grizzly bear recovery coordinator for 35 years, wasn't it, Chris? Yeah, so with working with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and he's with us tonight as well. And J.B. Jonkel, the fellow who usually will be one of the guys who shows up to wrangle bears when one's called in. So he has with Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, and he has a great insight in terms of what these bears have been doing of late and the mischief they get into. So we'll be directing some of our questions to him. And also tonight with us, Jenna Miller, we'll bring her up in a little bit, and she's with the Missoula City County Public Health Department talking about the health and safety aspects of the new regulations. So Mayor Davis, maybe you can kind of open it up for us a little bit and talk about how we got to this point now where we have these new regulations coming into effect.
I'm so pleased to be here to be the one that has the opportunity to talk about this, and I wish that I could say that I had that it's all my doing, but I happened to come in right after these efforts coalesced, and I am so pleased to have the opportunity to be in the role where now the city of Missoula and the community will put forth smart ordinances, and rather than an ordinance, rather a regulation, a health regulation, where we are helping keep the people of our valley safer and also keeping bears safer. So how this came together is there's a Bear Smart working group. There has been for some time. This is a number of different organizations. This includes local government, conservation districts, water districts, including wildlife agencies and organizations working on how to mitigate impacts of human interaction with wildlife, and in particular with bears. And this, in particular, I think, really came to a recent point in 2022 when we had a relatively dry summer, and some of the ecologic reasons that bears ended up coming into town more to forage for food. And when that happens, there ends up being more conflict. And so this group, re-energized in terms of coming together and developing a plan for how we can, one, put data behind where we know bear conflicts exist. And I want to say it's something like over 40%, it might be 45% of conflicts with bears are due to trash cans. And then there's a host of other things, right? When folks live, we live in the Rocky Mountains, and we are very lucky to live where we live, and we live amongst wildlife. So we have a responsibility to that wildlife. And so the other conflicts, of course, are a mix of different things. You've got chickens and animals and bird feeders and a number of different things. But garbage is pretty much half of the conflicts with bears.
And especially because that one is one that pretty much goes through the entire season. You'll have things like, fruit trees. I can remember, I don't know how many times I've been out on bear roundups with Jamie, and they'll be working to take the bear out of the tree, and sure enough, you'll walk around behind in the alley, and there's, a bunch of apples that have fallen off a tree or something like that. But trash in particular is something that really goes for weeks and months and can be quite an attractant.
All year round, all year round. And so in 2022, the Missoula Public Health is an organization that is city and county. And so there was a unanimous, this group basically came up with a plan for how to implement bear-resistant garbage cans, and working with our private garbage providers. That's a factor in all of this, is that our refuse businesses are not government owned, and so they had to be a willing partner in this process.
So in that case, we're talking about both Republic Services and Grizzly Disposal.
Yeah,
okay.
Exactly. And in 2002, when this plan was brought forward, then the city council, the Board of County Commissioners unanimously approved this plan, and it's really a health regulation, as well as so the Board of Missoula County Public Health, Missoula Public Health, to implement and change the refuse regulation to require bear-resistant cans in particular zones. And again, this is all backed by data. The folks that are in the room can really speak to this more specifically. So there's an opportunity to phase this in certain parts of Missoula Valley and our community where conflicts have been known to be the greatest, and also some of the higher concentrations of homes.
And the big part of this plan, and we'll get more into the details of this, but just generally off the top, is that it is phased in. It's a multi-year phase in, so that we can adopt the program, get used to different aspects of it, refine as necessary, and eventually incorporate all the listed neighborhoods. Right? Is that fair to say?
That is fair to say. And I think one of the things that excited me to learn about this is I knew that the community of Alberton had also taken on a voluntary planning program and wants to do the same. They have plenty of conflicts out there. But when this Bear Smart regulation was adopted here in Missoula, Potomac jumped onto this. Obviously that's a community that obviously also deals with wildlife conflicts, and they recognized the opportunity to participate in something that has been well thought out. It's informed by science. It's reasonable. It's realistic. It reduces conflict, obviously, with humans and bears, but also, it's a large ranching and agricultural community. And so it makes a lot of sense for them to really take some very sensical, kind of managing our environment as humans to reduce those conflicts.
Yeah. And I know that as part of this, there's already been quite a bit of discussion, and invariably when regulations or rule changes or any kind of change comes into effect, people sort of all of a sudden look around and realize this is happening. What's been some of the things you're hearing as say over the past month or so as this has approached and taking place, and just generally give us maybe some of the top things that you're hearing people say about the startup of this right off the bat.
So far, I've only heard support. That doesn't mean that people are, regulation does tend to sometimes get under people's skin. I do think, though, that most everybody that I encounter respect and recognize that we live in Western Montana. We live in Montana for a reason. It's a beautiful environment. We respect, wildlife and our relationship with wildlife. We also respect public safety, and public safety is a major factor in this. Last month, actually, we had a member of the audience ask questions specifically about the rollout of this and some of the detail as it related to the bear-resistant cans being available through the garbage companies. And so more as a kind of a matter of fact, how will we make sure that neighbors and others are going to comply with this new regulation? And so that's actually what spurred us to have this conversation in April. We felt like the timing was perfect, and so really I find there to be more curiosity about it, and then a lot of support. And most people, in fact, have said to me, I'm surprised this isn't in place already.
One other question, then we'll bring up some of the experts a little further on this. And I would imagine that the committee will continue to work and review how important are the partnerships going forward as we implement and also maybe revise and adjust for this. Talk about that.
Well, I mean, it's integral. I think it's something that, it's interesting as city government, we have conservation lands that we partner with the Fish, Wildlife, and Parks and others, when you think about Mount Jumbo and the elk herds that are up there, and we could never do that work alone. We rely on the expertise of scientists and biologists and folks that are managing public health that will evaluate the program, and then we work together to make it work for everybody. And so I actually would be really curious to hear from others about how we may assess the rollout of this. Most of this will be complaint driven. We'll hear from neighbors, we'll hear from neighborhood councils, we'll hear from people about how this is working, how many people are being compliant. I think for the most part, again, people want to reduce conflicts, and they don't want to see a bear in their backyard. While as exciting as that is, Most people don't want to see a bear in their backyard.
I don't. I've seen enough of them out in the wild. I have a problem with deer. That's a topic for another night. But,
Exactly. Let's keep that for another
yeah,
night.
that's another night. That's another problem. So we'll talk a little bit about that further. And I want to go ahead and invite Chris and Gina. Do you want to come up and grab these other two chairs and slide up here? And we'll start moving into some of the more, let me grab another microphone. We'll start moving into some of the more technical aspects of this and going from there. How's that for your shot? We look okay? You got us in? We can slide in maybe just a hair closer here. All right. There we go. All right. Well, good to have you both with us and joining us. And let's talk a little bit about the aspects of this. And I think, Gina, I want to start with you a little bit to talk about what we're seeing in terms of the health side of this, the health and safety, and what were some of the things that were being considered as the health department and health officials and the committee began looking at this. I'm going to pass this mic over to you.
Yeah, thanks. Ooh, thanks for that question. I think it's probably important to start a little bit further back before the phase 1 implementation to recognize that managing solid waste is just a foundational public health practice. It's part of what you do to ensure that we are preventing environmental contamination, rubbish and litter from getting into our streams and waterways, and also to prevent accumulation of trash that can attract vectors, pests and insects that can spread disease. So, in the United States in general, we do a pretty good job with that, but it's important to not forget that if we don't do a good job at that, the impacts are very real, and it's not just that it's ugly. So solid waste management rules have been in the health code, Regulation 3 of the health code. There's 8 different regulations, and they're all very variable, but it's been in the health code for decades. The bear buffer zone has existed for a long time, although not in the health code. So it was in city ordinance, and then even just outside of the city boundaries by a little bit, by extraterritorial powers. The real shift that's happening now is twofold. In addition to the bear-resistant containers that we'll talk a lot about, it's now in the health code, which is a city-county document. It's not bound by a city boundary or in 5 miles out or just apply in the county. And that's really great because the evaluation and education, compliance or enforcement is, it's so much more simplified. The boundaries of the city and county are not neat and tidy all the time, and so part of the plan to ensure this is successful and that it does what is intended to do is to partner with animal control, which is also part of the health department, to do some spot checks and talk to people and educate. And it's nice to know that these regulations apply everywhere in Missoula County. And
that's important because the bears, they don't use Google Maps. They go across boundaries. They're just looking for grub, and so
Right.
They don't know where the ins and outs. That's outside the city, inside the city. So this gives us that holistic ability to work on this problem.
Right, yeah.
And as this went, well, we'll talk about the effective aspect of this and how it goes in just a little bit. I want to turn it over to Chris, hand the mic over to him. And Chris, let's talk a little bit about, generally we usually know you related to grizzly bears, but there's an awful lot of overlap with our bears. Let's talk about this bear recovery from a regional standpoint, not just in Missoula. Talk through us a little bit about how we got to where we have so many bears of whichever variety out there.
Ooh, that's a big question. Well, there are black bears here, of course, all across Montana. And we have lots of black bears, and we live in black bear habitat. And as the Grizzly Bear Recovery Program began in 1981, we didn't have grizzly bears in the Missoula Valley or the Rattlesnake or anywhere close by here. But what has happened is the population has expanded in numbers and range. And we see grizzly bears now in the Rattlesnake. We've had grizzly bears all around Missoula. We've had them in Miller Creek. We've had them down by Lolo. They've been walking around in the North Hills. We've had a grizzly bear, or maybe more than one, that has crossed the Rattlesnake and gone over toward East Missoula. So there are grizzly bears here now, as well as black bears.
I always love that that one bear, and I can't remember her name, the one with the collar. I remember you showing me that, and she'd been all over the map. And I remember everybody, and this is probably at least 10 years ago, and it was like, wait a minute, this bear went right down Highway 93 in Lolo. That's not uncommon now in terms of where these bears are roaming, right? I mean, they're
Yeah.
much more prominent.
Where that bear was down in Lolo area. She actually crossed Lolo Creek and went a ways down and then came back up and then went around and headed into Idaho, went over into the St. Joe and then came back and then back up into the Bob Marshall again where she was originally collared, and eventually she lost her collar up by Eureka. So she's, we don't know where she is now, but she's a real traveling bear. But we have bears. We have grizzly bears here. We have lots of black bears here. We live in their habitat, so we have to live with them, and that's what we're trying to promote here.
And Missoula's not the only one dealing with this. I can recall when I want to say it was probably 21. I get confused because of the pandemic, but I can remember the Grizzly Bear Recovery Committee talking about this, and whitefish in particular, and some of the other jurisdictions around the West who are now saying we've got to really move in this direction. So this is we're not reinventing the wheel, but we're definitely in the amongst the leading communities on this, right?
Right. Missoula is the largest community in the West that I know of that is moving to a Bear Smart community. So it's the largest one, but there are other communities in Montana that have done this. Whitefish, Red Lodge, Virginia City, which is pretty small. Bozeman is talking about this, and they've actually gotten our documents, and they're going to start adapting it for Bozeman because they have black bears in Bozeman too. So, and grizzly bears pretty close. So, yeah, there's lots of communities that want to do this as well because they want to do the right thing. They're living in bear habitat. They want to minimize conflicts. They don't want to be a source of death for all the bears that walk into town. And that's why we started this whole program, because people thought that the solution to this was to capture them, call Jamie, and he would capture them and take them somewhere where they would live happily ever after. And that doesn't work. No. They try to come back, and if they come back, they get killed. They have to be removed. And if bears get hit by cars, they're in town, they're eating garbage that's not healthy for them. We can do better than that, and that's why we're coming up with this program.
And I know we found that too, not just grizzlies, but I mean black bears. Relocation's an interesting tool, but once a bear gets imprinted that, hey, there's food, there's a source, that really presents a problem from a management standpoint, because they'll travel, in grizzlies' cases, hundreds of miles to get back to where the times are good, right?
Exactly. We call that food conditioning, where they get into human foods, and then they know that humans in the places where humans live are a source of food. And so they go back to those places all the time. And they become bolder and bolder. And it's dangerous for them. It's certainly dangerous for people. And eventually those bears die. And so, we don't want to be a population sink in the Missoula Valley. We want to be a place where we teach by example and we do the right thing, and then we can share this with other communities in the Rocky Mountains.
And I know Mayor Davis alluded to this, but 22 was a particularly problematic. We may get Jamie in on this discussion, but I always remember the case we had that black bear that insisted that which I agree with, I suppose, that some of the best goodies were right outside Bernice's Bakery, right downtown, right?
Yeah.
Five bears?
5 bears, yeah.
5 bears. Okay, it was worth. And they're competing for my donuts. That's not, that has me upset right there. But yeah, it shows that their intrusion is no longer just on the outskirts, right?
No, they'll come right into town. And what we want to do is make it difficult for them to make a living here. If they're going to be here, they're going to eat natural foods, and they may come in and they may come out. Poor food years, there's going to be more here. Good food years, there won't be very many. But if we're not living properly, if we have our garbage available and we have bird feeders out and lots of fruit trees, then when they come into town, because there's not a lot of natural foods, then they say, hey, this is really a good place. And I'm going to go back there and I'm going to spend more time there. And if they have cubs, they're going to bring their cubs in and teach their cubs all these things, and the cubs will be on the road to ruin.
So you have a real generational problem that can develop quite quickly.
Right.
I remember the story of the sports reporter, I can't remember his name, over at ABC, where the bear came right into the walkway at his apartment that fall. And it was like, it's proof that even, they don't really worry too much about if they're conditioned, especially. It's where are the goodies and where's the shelter.
Yeah, they can lose their normal fear of people, which we call habituation, and then they become really relaxed around people, and they can walk right into, up on your deck in the middle of the daytime. And a bear like that is really dangerous, and a bear like that really has no future. And they get that because we've not been very good with our attractants.
Here's a question for both of you, and we'll start maybe with you, Chris, and then Gina, we'll have you chime in. Let's talk about the difference then in these bear-resistant containers, and walk us through a little bit about why they're different. And I've seen a lot of videos about them being tested. They test them down in West Yellowstone and things, one of the places. They have to be very specific, don't they, Chris, in terms of what will keep the bears out?
Well, they have a latch on them. There's a cover that locks with a latch. And, you and I can reach in there and slide this lever over and unlatch it and open it up, but the bear can figure that out. So he knocks it over and he pushes it around and it doesn't open up. But if you have one of the old regular blue dumpsters, you knock that over, the lid opens up, the garbage comes out, and he says, this is great. So it's a way to just keep the bears away from the garbage, and it works. And it also works with the automatic dumping systems that the haulers have. They just lift it up and they shake it, and the lid opens up, and then they can use it on their trucks too.
And the cans themselves too are much more sturdy than some of the ones historically that we've used with just the usual plastic dumpster.
Right, they have a strong sidewall on them. So sometimes the bear, they push on them or they jump up and down on them trying to open them, and they will not do that. They're strong. But they're resistant. They're not 100% successful, but they work almost all the time. And they're available, and I have one, they work great. So,
Gina and Phil said a little bit from the health and safety aspects of time, and educate us a little bit about why we go to this particular style of dumpster or canister.
Yeah, I mean, in addition to what Chris said, I think it's important to know that, as Mayor Davis mentioned, in Missoula we have 2 private hauling companies. So they have, I'm sure contracts or agreements with 2 different companies that manufacture these type of bear-resistant containers. They're not the only bear-resistant containers that are approved in the regulations. So as far as the health code is concerned, the container that folks are using has to be IGBC rated, and I'm probably going to get this acronym wrong, but it's like the International Grizzly Bear Commission?
Interagency Grizzly Bear.
Interagency Grizzly Bear. I got Grizzly Bear.
That's why we all could just call it the IGBC.
Yeah, yes. The IGBC approved list, and that list is available. So folks who want to buy their own can, or maybe don't subscribe to commercial service and manage their garbage on their own, need to be aware that it has to be a bear-resistant can that's on that list. Folks who provide their own can and also subscribe to service should also check with their hauler to make sure that it's compatible and they'll continue to pick it up effectively. The other thing to mention maybe is that there are 2 options in the health code, and the first is a bear-resistant container, and the other is a bear-resistant enclosure. And we work with Jamie very closely to, when folks have a plan to create an enclosure for whatever reason, rather than use a container, Jamie gets the first and the last word on if that enclosure is actually resistant. And then also they would want to check with their hauler if they subscribe to service to make sure that it's still accessible, and then they'll go ahead and pick that up.
Fill us in a little bit too on this transition and how the haulers, both Republic and Grizzly Disposal, are handling this transition for their customers.
Yeah, we could not have accomplished that without the cooperation of those 2 companies. So we're very grateful that they came to the table and participated in the way that they did. So the date by which phase 1 is fully implemented is April 30th, and both Grizzly Disposal and Republic Services have automatically started switching out cans. It would have been harder to conceive of a successful rollout if that wasn't part of the equation, if people had to take positive action to call and request. It is the regulation. It's required for everyone who's subscribing to that service, and so they just kind of took over that aspect of making sure the implementation was successful. So people, we've gotten a lot of calls. People are starting to see them, and it's before the implementation date. But they're out there. I don't know what the progress rate is for the switch outs for those 2 companies. I know that
it's underway.
Absolutely. Yep.
Mm-hmm. And the availability of these canisters too, the bear-resistant canisters, is better. I know a couple of years ago during that discussion with the IGBC that there was concern when whitefish started to transition. We can't get these because everybody. I'm hearing that supply now is catching up, and and we're in pretty good shape in terms of having these available, right?
Yeah, I've been on the periphery of some of the supply discussions. What's of course most important to us is we don't want to implement a regulation that's not attainable. And so we did confirm with both of the companies that they would be able to manage this in phases. So I'm less aware with how Whitefish or Virginia City
Right.
or other communities may have rolled it out. But, you know, we're phasing it in over time. It's not the entire Missoula Valley. And so there was enough lead time that I think that both companies were able to plan and ensure that they were able to help us out on that end.
Let's put a little geography with it too. So Grant Creek and Rattlesnake are the first. Is zone the right word that we're using for these? I mean, for operative purposes, it's okay to call it that, right?
Yeah.
Or neighborhoods. I
Yeah,
guess.
it's the two things probably. In the regulation, the title is a bear buffer zone or bear and wildlife mitigation zone, so that's true. And then when we're talking specifically Grant Creek and the Rattlesnake, it's called Phase 1.
Okay, so that's phase one. That's this year. Give us a little preview of what happens in succeeding years as this is expanded out then.
Yeah, so the next significant date in the regulation is September 1st of this year, and as Mayor Davis mentioned, that's when the Potomac zone goes into effect, and it's the same requirements as are in the other three phases. 1 year from April 30th, so April 30, 2025. Phase 2 will be under the same requirements to have garbage stored in bear-resistant containers or enclosures, and that generally is, feel free to correct me, but kind of Patty Canyon, South Hills area. And then Phase 3, which is a larger geographical area, but probably not more significant in terms of population, is more to the south and west of the community. So it is a true buffer zone. And Jamie and Chris can probably speak to the science around a buffer zone surrounding a densely populated area. But that is one of the questions that we get a lot is, you know, I live in Evero. I have to have a bear-resistant can. Why aren't these rules applying to my neighborhood? And so, you know, it is a great question, but the concept right now and the Bear Smart principle is to create a buffer zone so that bears aren't so easily just walking through our most populated areas. It really surrounds Missoula.
Can you answer one question too, Gina? And I don't want to throw you off here, but I know I've heard a lot of people be worried about cost of this. And I know each one of the operators probably taking a different approach, but can you speak generally to how the cost, because these are more expensive than, you know, the old canisters?
Yeah, absolutely. We anticipated that question, and so we kind of picked at Republic and Grizzly to be able to responsibly and accurately answer that, and it's hard. It's not easy to tell how those quarterly bills are set necessarily. We are confident, based on several people on the Bear Smart Working Group and at the Health Department's experience, that it's about $10 to $25 more expensive per quarter. I've heard leadership at Republic, which has turned over during this process, that it would be about $5 to $10 a month, so that kind of pencils out. The other option, which is more expensive, is folks can buy their own container, but you know, we do have some talking points about the pros and cons of purchasing your own bear-resistant can. They are expensive, and the benefit of leasing one from your hauling company is that, you know, as Chris alluded to, bears are going to work that thing over. It doesn't mean it's unattractive to a bear. They still want what's inside, and they break. And if that happens, if it's a leased can, they're going to replace it for you rather than it being all on your shoulders.
I can't remember. I've heard a price, and I don't know if it's even accurate, but I was hearing like it's a $300, $400 investment or something like that to purchase your own.
Yeah, and they're not readily available. I think Ace might have a few, but they're, you know, there's
That's
not
the thing.
hundreds available
Well, and that's
for
the
sale.
advantage Grizzly and Republic have, because they're buying in bulk and they're working with their suppliers, and so that whole system already exists. So.
Right.
I'm going to have Jamie slide up here with us on this side, Jamie. And while he's doing that, real quickly, Chris, talk a little bit about that buffer zone and how those, from a science standpoint, how does it make a difference to have those kinds of buffers around us?
Well, we have most of our conflicts in the periphery of Missoula. And so, you know, as we looked at where the problems were, they're kind of a circle around the town. And when we thought about rolling this out and implementing this, bringing in thousands of new bear-resistant containers, it would be very difficult for the haulers to get them all at once. And so we decided on a phased-in approach where we'd have the North Hills and Rattlesnake and Grant Creek first, because that was our primary area of conflict. The next area will be going around the corner and the university area, South Hills, Patty Canyon, places like that, and then the rest of the town in the third year. And that allows the haulers to get the cans, because it's thousands of new cans that are going to be replaced. And it allows us to put the most emphasis in the biggest areas of conflicts, which is the Rattlesnake and Grand Creek right now, and then phase in the other areas.
If you're in the audience, we appreciate you being here. Jenny has the cards. You can wait for her. She'll get those, and we'll get to some questions. Time's going by fast, this topic, so we'll get to your question. I do want to ask Jamie, maybe for a worst-case scenario story. I know you have a bunch of them, but you mentioned those 5 bears, hitting that one dumpster. I mean, that's not that unusual now, right? I mean, you guys are staying very busy, and it's not just in the summer months, right, or in the fall.
Yeah, each year is a little different. I'm trying to figure out what this year is going to be like. But, some years will have good moisture, and then the berry load is just perfect, and we hardly see any bear activity in town at all. Other years, it'll be a pretty moist year, but we'll have like a bumper chokecherry crop along the river, or a serviceberry crop along the river, and then all the bears, even though it's a good food year, will shunt into the valley floor. So this year, I'm a little concerned because we didn't have the snowpack. It's dry. Right now, we've got bears showing up, but they're kind of dispersed and not hitting a lot of garbage. So want me to give you a quick update of what kind of bear activity we have right now? So there is a bear working the South Hills, hitting garbage, and then there's about 3 bears up in the Rattlesnake area that are hitting garbage. We did have to capture and relocate 1 bear already. We've had 1 roadkill already, adult male in Milltown, and then we've had bears working Milltown, Clinton. It's been pretty quiet on the other sides of town, though. And then we've had no grizzly reports in the North Hills, but we did get a handful of reports of grizzly tracks in the north end of the Sapphire here. What was going on in 2022, or when we had all those grizzlies or all those black bears show up in town, was that we had such a incredible chokecherry crop. And so every bear in the country, this is just an estimate, but if we look at each, if you stood in the middle of the valley and did a circle, each one of these drainages has a population of black bears. The Rattlesnake drainage, because it's hooked into the wilderness, has a very large population. Hence all the issues in the Rattlesnake and Butler Creek, Laval Creek, and Grant Creek. But O'Brien Creek has its own population. Patty Canyon has its own population. So there are times where, I feel like we have 200 bears in the valley floor, in the perimeter. Not all of them are getting into garbage, but they're down for these natural foods. And some of them do start hitting bird feeders. Green lawns are the biggest draw when it's really dry. So a bear will come into your lawn area to eat, this sprinklered, nirvana of green grass and dandelions. And then they'll cast off on garbage and they'll cast off on bird feeders. So what was going on in 2022? We had a huge pipeline of chokecherry crop coming out of Hellgate Canyon along the Kim Williams Trail. And we just had a ton of bears show up. And those bears started moving and following the chokecherry and serviceberry, and even some hawthorn down into the center of the city. And it was a tough time because we had all the homeless camps in there as well. But we captured 5 big adult males, not subadults, not females, but big adult males right there by the bakery at the Milwaukee Ranger Station. So
that's remarkable. Yeah, I don't always like talking to Jamie when he says how many bears there are. It makes me look over my shoulder. Let's go ahead and get to our questions as we continue Wednesdays with the mayor. And if you have some additional comment, Andrea, jump in, and we'll have to turn off that one mic so we don't get a feedback if it's there. But let's go ahead and get our questions, and we'll start here in the middle. Go ahead and give us your name too, so we know.
My name's Jack Reed. My question is, so I live in part of the Rattlesnake that's one of probably ground zero. I live on Raymond, walk my dog every morning. up Wiley through Tom Green, which is where there was a bear this morning. I've got a 90-pound German Shepherd that will tell me where there's a bear in the park. And then consequently, I make my loop through Rattlesnake Grade School down Gilbert, and I see the same trash can that was tipped over last week that's always out, and it's not bear-proof. And I also question whether or not the lady that lives there is going to have the physical capability to operate. At least my can's quite difficult, but because of the weight of the lid and some other things. But that's a different issue. That I have kind of two issues, but they're interdependent, and it's on the bears. And to me, we've never taken away the garbage part of the attractant when the bears are most active. And the reason I say that is in my neighborhood on Wiley Street, Wiley's a one-way, and the garbage truck has to go all the way to the end of the street, and they turn around. And that backup alarm wakes me up. And it woke me up April 15th, and so I went on my deck and took a video of the garbage truck at 4:44 a.m. And what I've noticed for years, because I've lived up the Rattlesnake since 1976, and as an adult I noticed this, I didn't notice this as a kid, of course, but people come home, so tomorrow's is garbage day in my neighborhood. They'll come home after work, they'll make dinner, they'll clean up the kitchen, they'll take their garbage out, and they take their garbage to the curb. So then that attractant is there from, let's say, 8 o'clock tonight until the garbage company picks it up in the morning. And to me, we've never required the garbage company to wait till 7 a.m. to pick up these cans. And I'm not saying that it's going to cure anything, but I think it would make a big difference as far as taking away the attractant when the bears are most active. Because also in my experience, they're way more skittish in the daylight. The first bear I ever saw in Missoula was in a tree at Rattlesnake Grade School. In the morning, because we showed up for school, the bear's in the dumpster, it goes up the tree. Believe it or not, my teacher took us all out there to go look at this bear. This is 1976, a little bit different time. So yeah, but it goes back to the noise ordinance at 4:44 in the morning. And the way I see it is that I see that this is a commercial vehicle that's required to have a backup alarm as dictated by OSHA. And that decibel is rated, and you could look it up, and Wikipedia says it's between 97 and 115 or 114 decibels. I talked to the city attorney this week, Ryan, and he mentioned that vehicles over 10,000 gross pounds can exceed that up to 80 decibels, can exceed the noise limit up to 80 decibels, because the noise limit after 10 p.m. is, I want to say 50 or 60 decibels. But anyways, no matter what, that garbage truck turning around before 7 a.m. is in violation of the city's noise ordinance, because that backup alarm has to be a minimum of 97 decibels to 114.
Let's give him a chance to answer. Let's break that.
So two things. One, to me, this is the thing that gets the garbage company, if they're not cooperative, out of the neighborhoods before, and then hopefully we can retrain everybody to wait till the morning. Or granted, if they have to go to work at 5 a.m., the few cans that are going to be out at 4:30, I think the difference that we can make if we make the change would be great. But I'm not an expert, but
Let's see what they say. Let's talk about the bear dinner bell first, because that's the one. Do they sound off on these, say like that, or, noise of that? Would they? Yeah.
I think
But that part
the
of
issue is when the trucks are coming to pick up the garbage, because if they come at 4 o'clock in the morning, you can't get up at 3:30 to put out your garbage. That doesn't make any sense. So we've asked the haulers not to do that. We've asked them if they need to pick up that early, they should be in the center of town where we don't have the ordinance. And hopefully, we're going to get that kind of cooperation out of them, because we've explained that to them in meetings that we've had, the Bear Smart Working Group, that if you guys are out there at they used to come by my neighborhood at 5:30, if you're doing that, you can't expect people to roll their cans out before you get there. They're going to be putting them out the night before, and that's a problem, because all that is sitting out there for the bears. So hopefully, we'll have the companies changing their route times so that they're not out there at the crack of dawn like that.
Jenna, you want to add on to that?
Yeah, I would just add that you make a good point about the pickup time, and to kind of dovetail on what Chris said, I've probably talked to 50 people in the last couple of weeks who have said, my garbage is picked up at 8. It's easy for me to roll it out at 7:30. I'm not part of the problem. Can I get an exception? Or, if I pinky promise to keep it in my garage until, I live at home, I see the garbage truck coming. And I think probably the point that I would like to add is that we have had a bear buffer zone for a very long time in city ordinance, and if it was working, we wouldn't be seeing the problems that we're having today. So identifying a certain number of hours beforehand and then returning the can to a secured location by 9 p.m. that night is not a strategy that's worked. We've tried it for a long time, and it just hasn't been successful. So I think it's just a combination of those two things. I think that it's hard to identify the hours where if outside of that an unsecured can would be out on the curb, there wouldn't be an issue. And so that's why bear resistant containers is kind of the best practice these days to really make a difference.
Jamie, want to add anything on that point?
Yeah, another thing too is like some of the pickup is lateral, along the creek. So, it'll be a pickup at some place within the rattlesnake drainage on one side or other of the creek. So we are also visiting with the garbage or sanitation companies to see if maybe it could be picked up in a little different stage, like maybe have the lower rattlesnake picked up on a certain day and the upper rattlesnake on the next day. Because what we're seeing is a lot of the bears were keying in that somewhere in the rattlesnake, there were always going to be cans out the night before. And then, having the bear-resistant containers will solve some of the issues. And then if we can get to work with the sanitation companies on pickup, maybe that'll solve some of the issues as well. But those bears are smart. I mean, they figure things out. And even with these bear-resistant containers, we're going to have individual bears, we already have, that have figured out how to open them up. And sadly, over time, these bears that escalate their attempts, if they aren't able to get their easy garbage like they have been, we're probably going to be seeing more break-ins. We're probably going to be seeing more bears, slipping through dog doors to reach garbage cans, tear off garage doors, that kind of thing. But, over time, those are the individual bears that we'll be targeting. And sadly, some of those habitual, really chronic, property damage bears will be having to destroy. But that memory will eventually come out of the population, hopefully.
That is a part of this too, isn't it, Chris? I mean, you guys, I know, and I've been around a lot of wildlife stories over the years. It's that generational aspect of things. And you see that with ungulates. I mean, I could tell you stories about elk herds that, showed up one year, and by year 5, 10, whatever, all of a sudden they're out in the golf course in huge numbers. I mean, this is how animals work, right? They learn things.
They will learn this, and they have learned this in Missoula, where garbage is and how you get into it, and where the bird feeders are and where the fruit trees are. And they've taught their young this. And there's a whole population of those bears that are out there. And as we implement this effort to secure all these foods, these problem bears that Jamie just explained, that still have that memory and are still looking for it, they're going to become more aggressive, and they're going to have to be removed from the population. So we expect a peak of removals here as we start securing this stuff and we get into a more natural population that doesn't have all these things that they've learned while we've been such poor stewards of our attractants.
Mayor Davis, do you want to add anything on that question?
I don't think I could really add anything that's
Okay,
more specific about that.
Good.
But I think going back to an earlier question you had asked around evaluation, this group, this Bear Smart group, the city and the county, the health department, and then our partners in all of this will continue to evaluate the success of the program, and then we'll make tweaks as we go along.
Okay, good. Any other questions? Yes, let's get you here in front.
So I can kind of attest to the behavior of the bears changing over time in West Yellowstone, where I spent many years. Long ago, one of the main tourist attraction was going to watch the bears eat at the dump. And over the years, they've lost that behavior. If you're also looking for a community that successfully coexists with bears, West Yellowstone has an excellent, bear-proof trash can program and works there. And I'd also like to ask, is there any plans to place these cans in the parks available for our homeless population to be using? Because that will definitely cut down on some interactions that will keep these bears safe.
Yeah. Good question. Jenna, what about that? More municipal locations of bear-proof units.
Yeah, so as far as phase 1, 2, and 3 in Potomac, that applies to public and private property alike. I have spoken with Mike Nonemacher at the city about the parks that happen to be in phase 1, 2, and 3, and they do intend to, of course, follow the same regulations that private landowners are expected to follow. I think that they have some standards for aesthetics and durability in the parks that, they're not going to call Grizzly Disposal or Republic Services and get the Kodiak or the toter cart. They're going to have those, metal.
Yeah, the metal
brown-
ones like we see in state parks. And
Exactly.
a Forest Service
Yeah,
situation.
it is their intention.
Which brings up a question I meant to ask earlier. What about businesses? We've had a little bit of discussion about downtown business, but especially if a business, say up the Rattlesnake, they're in that zone in phase 1 or maybe in a later phase. What kind of approach is being done specifically for those small business owners? Again, does that go through through Grizzly Disposal and Republic, I would imagine, or just what?
Yeah, most business owners subscribe to commercial pickup the same way other folks in the community do, and the requirement across the board is the same. Trash, garbage, refuse has to be stored in a way that it's not attractive and not accessible. For businesses that have larger dumpsters, it probably isn't going to be multiple 90-plus gallon bear-resistant carts, but there are ways that Jamie could probably speak more intelligently about to secure a dumpster. There's lids and clips. There's also very effective enclosures, and that's the route that most of the businesses probably will take if they have a higher volume of trash.
And I would imagine, Jamie, like everything, this is an evolving thing. I mean, design and those kind of things, it's not just residential, but I know from a business standpoint, that's also a concern in the West as well, right?
Yeah, and if people would like to see examples of some of the containment structures that have been built, over the years, I've collected a lot of photographs. And if someone has built a nice structure, please send me the photos, because a lot of folks wondering kind of how to build their containment structure for a dumpster or even 2 garbage cans will contact me, and then I will send them a selection of pictures, and then I even have some blueprints. And what's nice about these containment structures over a bear-resistant garbage can is that it solves that issue of overflow. Like, these bear-resistant garbage cans can only hold so much garbage, and sometimes they won't latch right. Sometimes through human error, they aren't latched all the way, and then the bears will rip them apart where they're non-functional anymore, which is a reason to lease them rather than buy them. But got some great recipes if people are interested. I'm all for containment structures.
Makes sense, especially in the business side of things. I want to, one other question came to mind, Chris. We were talking about West Yellowstone and, that situation. I think we could all, for a certain age, we remember especially those kind of things. Let's talk about the reverse side of this, because you worked on recovery for so long. And this is sort of outside the garbage, but how critical is it to take this kind of a management bear-aware thing properly? How does that help the overall management of the species, maybe outside the valley or those kinds of things?
Well, the effort with all the bears we have now, we've recovered the population, and population's doing really well. Our challenge now is to minimize human-bear conflicts. And because the bears are in places where they haven't been, now we're seeing these conflicts, and the conflicts lead to dead bears, they lead to human injuries, they lead to property damage. And so there's a big emphasis underway to minimize human-bear conflicts related to livestock, related to garbage, related to transfer stations, all the things that we do in small communities, in ranch communities and ranch houses themselves, what can be done to minimize these conflicts. And there are lots of people working on this and lots of ways to do it. Electric fencing, bear-resistant cans, lots of things that are underway to minimize human-bear conflicts everywhere across the landscape, not just in towns.
The thing I'm fascinated too with this is that, we have these specific recovery zones that we've talked about. and the one that's closest to Missoula, the Bitterroot is getting lit up. I mean, that's kind of the next area of focus. So they're going to be a little closer than up in the Bob or up in Glacier now.
That's right. And all the public campgrounds where there are bears need to have bear-resistant garbage containers as well.
Good.
Or the pack it in, pack it out, approach, where if you're bringing something in there, you take it all away.
Yeah.
Don't leave anything there.
Okay, good. We got time for maybe one more quick question here before we go. I don't want to cut it off if we have specifics. Let's get right here in front. Go ahead. Just stand up. Give us.
I'm Radley. Yeah, I'm Radley Watkins. I'm with the Missoula Conservation District and a member of the Bear Smart Working Group. And one of the things that Jamie brought to mind was when I joined the group, they told me that, when I joined the group, they said that there was an overlap of the smartest bears and the dumbest people, if you will, when it comes to working the latch on the garbage container. And when I got mine, I found out where I laid on that spectrum. So that was kind of unfortunate for me. But the reason I bring this up is because it is hassle. Those are big, heavy cans. And some people feel it's a burden. And although the Missoula Conservation District's been in support of the Bear Smart efforts, we also try to represent the views of our constituents who say, okay, feds and state, like there are too many bears on the landscape. Why do you guys want to do this to save the bears? Like, so I would ask this panel, what's your rebuttal to that? Like, why do you just put so many bears on the landscape that we have to deal with these very complicated latches that some of us just struggle with?
I feel your pain. I can imagine what it's going to be like in my neighborhood.
Oh,
Chris, go ahead.
Let me start, and Jamie can go after me. These bears naturally come into Missoula, as Jamie said, using natural foods, or they come in and they get human foods. And we live in bear habitat. They don't live in our habitat. We live in their habitat. And if we were going to try to, remove all the bears so that we didn't have bears in Missoula, we'd have to kill a lot of bears, essentially all the bears around Missoula. Hundreds and hundreds of black bears would have to die, and we'd have to do it all the time. And that is not a successful way to live in bear habitat. So, our approach is that we live in bear habitat. We have to modify our behavior. As Radley said, we're supposed to be smarter than them, and we can figure out ways to secure our attractants. And I think we can successfully live with these animals and, be good stewards of the place we live. And, the alternative to that, if we don't want to store our foods properly and do the right thing and not have bears in town, we'd have to kill all the bears around here in a continual way, because it would take hundreds and hundreds of dead bears to make sure that there weren't any in Missoula anymore. And I don't think people want that.
The grizzly numbers are obvious. I mean, we track those. But what about, do we have more black bears on the landscape now than we did 50 or 60 years ago?
I'm going to let Jamie answer that one. He's fish, wildlife, and parks.
Well, so yeah, our grizzlies are definitely expanding. Our black bears are pretty much at carrying capacity, and we have hunting seasons. There's more harvest today than there were 4 or 5 years ago. It's getting very popular to hunt black bears. But the concept that I'm always trying to visit with folks about is that, here, like in the Missoula area, we've enhanced the habitat. Our best black bear habitat is in the valley floors and these sort of side draws. So bears here on the south end of what we call the Northern Continental Divide ecosystem, they key into our berry loads, and they have for thousands and thousands of years. Sure, in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, any bear that showed up ended up in the freezer. But since then, as the valley floor has been subdivided and developed, we've really enhanced this habitat to make it even better. I always tell people we've turned milk into cream, and in some places, cream into butter or ice cream. So we've enhanced the habitat at such a level that a lot of these bears are discovering the urban interface, and then they're going, holy smokes, let's go to town here. And they can gain a lot of weight. They have a higher success at breeding. They have higher success at having cubs. But sadly, there's a lot of roadkill and there's a lot of management. So it's not that there's more bears. What we've done to the habitat has made it better. so that a lot more bears are coming here, and hence it's sort of a sink. And sadly, we do lose a lot of bears every year to roadkill and then management. But that can be solved if we can have this invisible barrier, we call it a behavioral barrier, around the edges of the urban interface so that this behavior doesn't develop in the first place.
Not as intrusive that way.
So I have one thing to add to that. I want everybody to remember that, we're talking about how many bears there are, but there's a heck of a lot more people now in Montana than there used to be. There's 375,000 more people in Montana than there was in 1980. And since 1980, we've lost over 1 million acres of private land to development, housing development in Montana. So we are pushing further and further into bear habitat all the time. And that brings us into conflict with those bears who were fine until we got there. So it's not the bear numbers that are changing, it's us that are changing. We're pushing everywhere where the bears are trying to live, and we need to try to balance what we're doing.
And we've certainly seen that in other states. I mean, Washington State in particular, when they got all that growth out there in the Cascades, they started, build Microsoft mansions out in the foothills. It was like, where'd all the bears? Oh, they were already here. Jenna.
Yeah, and
Gina,
I might
sorry.
just add a different perspective to Rad's question about, it's not just about the bears. Of course, it's the bear buffer zone, and that's critically important. And Jamie and Chris make excellent points, but it's also about solid waste management. So bears could be adorable and friendly and cuddly and not hurt anyone, and we could all love them very much, and they still tip over garbage. And you cannot have a healthy and safe community and environmental protection if garbage is being constantly spilled. So even if it was dogs, even if it was cats, we would have a cat buffer zone, and we would have containers that cats couldn't tip over, whatever it might be. So even though I'm not a biologist, I get that question a lot. Why are you prioritizing bears over people? And really, from our perspective, from the health code regulations, it's really just ensuring that we're all managing our trash. And in Missoula, we have to do that in different ways based on where you live in the community.
I want to close with one final point. We talk about the educational part of this, and people may not be aware of the resources that are available online that the committee has endorsed and put out there. I mean, it's really amazing. The Missoula Bears website in particular is, Jamie always has reports on there about where the activity is and those kinds of things. How important, for any of you to respond to that, Gina, maybe you, how important is that to be a part of this in terms of that bear education aspect of things?
So, our approach to compliance and enforcement, which I know everyone is most keyed into, is really education first. And the health department has excellent people doing really great work and working hard, but we only have so many people. And so to take an education first standpoint with something that affects so many people over multiple phases, we have to have those partners in place. People in carnivores and defenders of wildlife and lots of other folks have come to the table. Neighborhood groups in the rattlesnake are in preliminary conversations to have bear aware events where they'll have both canisters and people can work the latch and to see how it really works. And so I think it's one of the things in the public health realm that most people can get behind, and the education is compelling and it's useful. Thanks mostly in part to the folks here on the panel, giving us the real deal on why it's so important to take different measures.
And I know Jamie's a busy guy, but you always like to hear from people, their observations, what they're seeing in the neighborhoods. That's really what that Missoula Bears site is all about, right?
Yeah, it allows us to keep track of where the bears are showing up first, what foods they're going for, natural foods, but then where the priority areas are. That's one reason we were able to kind of target the North Hills as phase one. But there are other areas, that if someone said, where in O'Brien Creek area do we need to get some cans first? If we had to prioritize them next year, there are certain neighborhoods where we've just got chronic issues, and a lot of those issues have been reported on Missoula Bears from the public. So we don't really know what's going on unless the public reports to us.
Chris, any final thoughts?
No, I think everybody needs to recognize that we're doing this as a phase in. We're We're trying to educate the public on this. We want people to be partners in this process. We don't want to tell people what to do. We want people to be partners and say, yeah, we want to do the right thing. We live in bear habitat. We live in Montana for a reason, and we like having these animals around in the forests around us, and we want to do the right thing. We live in bear habitat. Let's do the right thing and make sure that they're still around.
And the mic to the mayor, and final thoughts, Andrea?
My final thoughts are just that I feel very fortunate that we have such strong partnerships, then people willing to, put time and energy into problem solving and thinking about how we're going to, solve for these dynamics in a growing community. And I think that it's, the city of Missoula also does keep information and promote this kind of information on our website, try to make it as easily locatable and understandable as possible. But my final thoughts are I just want to say thank you to this group and others that have worked on this over the years and have been so committed for so long. And the old adage of a fed bear is a dead bear. We're hoping to really get away from that. And the fact that Missoula is the largest community in the West that has policies that this regulation and this program is in place is really incredible. I think that as a result of that, more people will, more communities will take a look at what we have and how we manage this kind of a program, and that information then will be shared and grow. And there's a good chance then that other communities will be able to adopt something like this and also manage attractants better.
Well put. Well, I'm always humbled whenever I get to hang out with expert people because I learn things and great suggestions. The thing I take away from this that I've learned a lot tonight, but the one thing is, I live in Miller Creek and I'm thinking to myself, well, eventually, but in the meantime, in the interim, great suggestion. Don't take my garbage out at 9 o'clock at night. I get up early in the morning and I could probably wait. So I think there's things that'll be interesting and we can all plug into that educational process. So, okay. Want to thank Gina Miller from Missoula County Public Health, Missoula City County Public Health. Thanks for being with us. Chris Servine. Chris, always good to talk with you again. You have taught me so much about bears over the years, and I really appreciate your expertise. And of course, Jamie Jonkel, who is, I always give him the unofficial title of bear wrangler, but or bear whisperer or something like that. So he's just a real expert and a real treasure from Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. Thank you. And thank you, Mayor, for being with us and bringing this panel together. There will be more. I'm sure we'll have some follow-ups to this in years to come as this program rolls out and we become bear aware in Missoula. I'm Dennis Bragg. Thanks for joining us for Wednesdays with the Mayor.